So if you're trading, if the thoughts ever come to your mind when you make a trade, let's say it's positive trade and you make a gain, if the thought ever comes to your mind, oh, I was right, that is not the correct perspective. Or if you lose a trade, you think, oh, I was wrong, also not the correct perspective. What you have to realize when it comes to trading is that you, the trader, are never right or wrong. The market is always right. The market will do what it wants to do based on the economic circumstances of the time that you're trading. That's it. And there's nothing else to it. So you could read the charts totally right, and it may go the wrong way a little bit, where that's where you got to know when to cut the cord and get out before it becomes anything massive, you know? Driving is such a great analogy because you do have very linear rules of the road, right? There's a speed limit. Stop signs, you do a certain thing. Stop lights, you do a certain thing. Like there are rules that you have to obey by law, but which way you turn, it's up to you. It depends on where you're going. Shoot, even if you have a point A and point B, there's different routes that you can take to get to point B, right? So in a way, it's flexible, but there is a form of rigidity to it as well with the rules and the laws. It's the same kind of thing in trading. So a lot of people, when they enter a trade, and for anyone that has had any kind of one-on-one coaching with me, you know I hate this. I hate when I see in a trading plan, when I enter, I set a 10 pip stop loss. I hate that because in a lot of situations, maybe that's a great idea, but not in every situation. You know, what I do is I focus on what does the chart tell me? And I found this whenever I've done one-on-ones with James and I ask him a question, he'll be like, well, it depends. He always uses the word depends. Every single answer. Well, it depends. Depends on what the market's doing. It depends on what the chart is showing. So instead of a stop loss at 10 pips, why don't you look at your charts, see a couple of your wins, a couple of your losses, and look at maybe some kind of indication on the chart that would have told you, hey, this is the exit. Maybe it's 10 pips, maybe it's 8, maybe it's 15, whatever it is. Let the chart dictate what that is.
So what are the secrets? How do some of the most successful entrepreneurs find the freedom that we all got into business for in the first place? How did they find the time, energy, and resources to launch and scale strong? And how do entrepreneurs like us align our time, money, and energy in a way that will allow us to reach what we set out to achieve? These are the key questions, and this community will give you the answers. Welcome to the Prosperity Movement.
Welcome to the Prosperity U podcast. This is where we like to come in, hang out, have some good conversations, specifically surrounding building wealth, trading, and anything that has to do with really building a legacy for ourselves and our families for generations to come. And so one of the great benefits to being in a community in general is that you get to notice certain patterns. And so it's really cool to see, you know, at scale, certain patterns start to develop and kind of show themselves, and we're able to kind of see it. And then if you don't fit the pattern of success, we can tell you what these guys are doing, and you can kind of make some pivots in order to get that. So normally we talk about patterns like, you know, certain trading things or perspectives and things like that. And today is a little bit different, I should say. So Bryan was actually just observing. He's been talking a lot over the last few months with some of our members, and specifically some of our better traders. And in talking with them, he found that it's an interesting pattern he found where most of them have quite an extraordinary amount of humility, and they're very humble people. They're doing the best in our community, but they're so very, very humble. So we started kind of thinking about that, and the three of us, Brian, Travis, and I, we talked about it on Monday quite a bit during our Bible study. And so that's kind of what we want to talk about today. Humility.
Right on, yeah.
So Travis, one of the cool things that you brought up on Monday, you were kind of talking about like the word itself and some of the plays off of it. Do you want to go into that?
I think you're referring to when we were talking about the humility, we kept using it in a positive sense, right? And I said, but there's also the negative sense to it as well. And so if that's what you're talking about, then sure, we can dive into that. When we're saying, you know, somebody who's humble, we call it, we call them say it by that term, but we mean that they're showing humility. And I get to thinking is like usually, I mean, if you're humiliated, isn't that a negative thing? Isn't it like embarrassing? Isn't it a kind of a horrible feeling, right? Well, for those who show humility, it's not just that negative thing. It's also this idea of being like anti-pride or selfless or not self-centered. Like there's I mean, when we start really diving into these different words, it feels like everything kind of melds together into one, into another, right? And so I wish I was a better, is it entomologist? That entomologist, the studies of words. I wish I was better at that. But just in a general sense, humility and being humble is both a good and a bad in different situations, right? It doesn't feel good to be humiliated, but it's good to show humility, right? So I think all that started was that I heard somebody talking about pride, right? Pride was the original sin. And they oftentimes you'll hear someone say like pride is the sin of all sins. And so if that's the case, then what's the virtue of all virtues? And I think that it's the opposite of pride, right? Humility. And if we just think on a purely personal level and not even include trading right now, who would you rather be around? Somebody showing the negative side of pride or somebody who's showing the positive side of humility, right?
Yeah.
Just that kind of meat to me, it makes a lot of sense. Like it attracts more of what you want, more of the good stuff in life. And showing that inside of trading or inside of prosperity movement in particularly is kind of equivocated to the idea of coachability, right? The more humble you are, probably the more coachable you are. And those things really do help in someone's approach to learning how to trade, right? Is that kind of the general sense of what you were wanting to discuss?
Yeah,
Train
exactly.
on the track here, man.
Yeah. No,
Wow.
exactly that. And we actually briefly brought it up to James as well on Monday, and
Uh-huh.
um he said specifically, he said, "Oh yeah," he goes, "That is absolutely an attribute of a great trader," because he said that he had his phase, if you will, of like, I'm the best, like a lot of pride getting in there, and he said the market had to humble him, you
Yeah.
know? So the question is, how many times does the market have to humble you before you realize the market's in control?
Yeah, I remember that was the statement we wrote down. Was it be humble or be humbled?
Yeah,
That's the catchphrase from the
yeah,
conversation, right? Be humble or be humbled.
yeah,
Either you're going to show this level of humility or the pride gets to us, and if we start making emotional decisions, right, that's where mistakes happen. That's the path to destruction, right? And funny enough, that's very mirrored in the gospel. Right?
yeah,
Pride is the path to destruction, and those who are meek are going to inherit the earth. And so meek is another word for humble in some sense,
yeah.
right? Is there a difference?
I
Meek is
think there
more
might be.
like timid natured, not so much
Yeah,
humble, right?
I think there's a small difference, but I think they do kind of coincide. They're pretty hand in hand. Um, we could say there's a meek difference. I don't know if that works. Um,
I wish I had some like radio sound effects, and I'll put in some studio laughter.
bow, bow, bow. Uh, so yeah, I think that's good. Be humble or be humbled. Um, so the other thing I was thinking about, so it was kind of a joke. I grew up in a very religious household, and I studied a lot of scripture with family and with friends, and I had a lot of friends uh, that we would talk about stuff like this. And one of the things that was kind of
That's what
funny.
you and your friends did in your childhood.
Oh yeah, man, I'm such a nerd.
I was getting in trouble, and
But not all the
you
obviously.
had deep philosophical conversations.
I
And
did. I
yeah, and I was ding dong ditching people. we, we are very different, aren't we?
did. Yeah. I did some ding dong ditching too.
Like your own
Anyway,
house, like just your parents.
and then if they caught us, we would be missionaries. We'd be like, "Have you heard about Jesus?"
Anyways, I'm sorry I distracted us.
So, so, um, one of the things we would joke about is we would always say there's only two things you should never pray about, and of course, or pray for,
I remember
and
this.
and of course this is a joke, but it is kind of funny. Um, you should never pray for patience, and you should never pray for humility, because the only way that you get either of those attributes is by getting your patience tested and by being humbled, which is oftentimes humiliating, as we were talking about. And so I always joke around. I used to pray for patience, and now I have 6 kids. You know, so, but anyways, I totally disagree with it. You should absolutely pray for both. In fact, the question came up on Monday. If being humble is something you struggle with, how can you better attain that characteristic? Is there some kind of framework? And by the way, if you don't know if you're humble or not, it's a good sign, right? If you're like, I'm the most humble person ever, oh, that's not a good sign. Um,
Donald Trump. I'm humbled. I'm probably the most humbled ever out of every one of us. Hey, Trump is not very good, but yeah, we came up with like a list of three things last time, right? Like, how do you become humble? And um, I think it's important to start at least here is that showing humility is like a moral judgment, right? You're saying what is good and what is bad, and such, and so we have to have that standard. And if we do have a standard, well, we call that God's standard, right? There's something above us. And so praying is one of those things that's really important. And a lot of people that we talk to and are listening right now are not actively doing that or have never done that. You know, um, it was prayer. It was another one.
serving others.
Service. Yeah, service. What better way to be humble than to stop thinking about yourself
Yeah.
and go think about the needs of someone else? And the last one is the actual experience of the being humbled, right? To experience things. If you're not actively going and trying to make progress in this direction, then life will life will hand you those lemons,
Yeah.
right? And it happens, right? So if we're not cognizant of this in trading, and an answer that we say all the time is that what gets measured gets managed, right? If we're not actively managing this compartment of our human, not dilemma, what's the word? Human nature, right? This is a part of us. If it's not actively being managed and measured and such, then that's what happens to a lot of traders in the markets is they get a little bit cocky. They get instead of being disciplined with data driven decisions, they think they reinvented the wheel. Even James was suspect to that, right?
Yeah.
To that thought
Yeah.
process.
Yeah. So if you're trading, if the thoughts ever come to your mind when you make a trade, let's say it's a positive trade and you make a gain. If the thought ever comes to your mind, oh, I was right, that is not the correct perspective. Okay. Or if you lose a trade, you think, oh, I was wrong, also not the correct perspective. What you have to realize when it comes to trading is that you, the trader, are never right or wrong. The market is always right or wrong. I'm sorry, the market is always right. The market will do what it wants to do based on the economic circumstances of the time that you're trading. That's it. And there's nothing else to it. So you could read the charts totally right, and it may go the wrong way a little bit, where that's where you got to know when to cut the cord and get out before it becomes anything massive.
Yeah, I've heard a few people talk about I did everything to a T. It was 100% lined up, and I was wrong. It's like, well, is
No.
that really the case, right? Like you talk about it in a sense that I really like. You say it was effective or it was ineffective, right?
Yeah.
And that kind of gets rid of the judgment. It's more of like, well, it wasn't wrong, but it was ineffective. That was
Yeah.
the case, right? Can you expand upon that a little bit more? Like what when you talk about the difference between saying and identifying these situations as effective or ineffective versus right and wrong, what does that really mean, and how can people to utilize that?
Yeah. Well, actually, I first learned it. I didn't have the proper names and labels for it, but I first learned it when I was in doing a lot of marketing and I was doing a lot of testing with my affiliate marketing stuff. And some of some of the campaigns flopped, just flopped so bad. And I remember thinking to myself, gosh, I'm a terrible marketer. Like I used to think that. And then some of the tests, it went really, really well. And I was like, man, I'm a fantastic marketer. Right. And, and all of a sudden I started to realize it has nothing to do with if I'm good or bad. I'm just testing things out and seeing what sticks strategically. Right. Um, and
I'm
so I've
strategically bad sometimes.
that's right. So so I kind of learned back then not to stop judging myself so much, or at least so harshly. And then later, when I met Blair, Blair's the one that taught me about effective versus ineffective and
Right.
getting rid of good, bad, right, wrong in terms of my verbiage and my language patterns. And that has helped tremendously because see, when you trade and you say, "Oh, that was a good trade," it's like that story. I'll never remember the story fully. Let me see if I can just Google it real quick of that farmer. Story of farmer.
One whose kid broke his leg or something.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Not good or bad. Let's see here.
Well, while you're looking that up, to keep everything kind of tied together, we're talking about effective or ineffective versus saying something along the lines of right and wrong. And this is a moment of, showing some humility here. And instead of having that pride of judgment, right, you can have the humility of knowing that some things are outside of complete control, right? So you have to be it's just such a funny concept. I'm having a hard time putting it to words here with showing the humility in the markets, of what that really means. Maybe you can help me out here. What do you think if we were to simplify it down to a couple sentences? What does it mean to be humble in the markets?
I would say it would be surrendering to the market. Um, so not showing bias. Um, it's like for example, I'll give you a quick example. So sometimes what'll happen is when you initially analyze the market, we might see that, oh my gosh, this is a buyer market. Like I'm only going to take buys. That's okay. Here's where it becomes challenging. Let's say that you say based on everything, the safest trades are going to be buys. So I'm only going to take buys. I'm not taking any sells. But then the market tanks. Okay. You didn't enter because you followed your rule. Good job. That's great. Okay, let the market do what it wants to do. Now that it tanked, though, you have to reevaluate. Right now, you got to see, is it still buys only? Or did the whole market just shift and now I need to, open up my perspective on this? Because what some people do is they'll just stay in the buy only mode even after it tanks, and they'll be like, "Oh, I'm only taking buys," and they forget that the market can shift during a session even, and so it's you got to surrender to it and kind of be open to what it wants to do, and then that's going to be the best way for you to get the most probable outcome.
Okay. So what's the barrier between having that flexibility and having a trading plan?
Ah,
What's that
okay.
delineation, right?
Yeah, 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 yeah. So this is where we talk. Oh, Guy, what was it that we talk about? We talk about being rigid and flexible, or what was the word you used the other day with me, Guy? I can't remember exactly what it was, but liquid. It's being what how am I missing this? Oh shoot, I don't have the chat. Thank you. Linear or liquid. So thank you, Guy. Yeah, so it's being linear you know what? Sorry guys, let me turn on this chat. I know we're already halfway through here today, but there we go. Sorry. Chat's now open.
Mhm.
Um, so linear or liquid is kind of the way to think about it. What is linear and rigid and what is liquid and flexible? And you kind of have to have both. So your trading plan should basically be scenario based, which means yeah, it can be very, very, very um linear, where when this happens, this happens, this happens, this happens, then I enter a trade. You can do that. There's nothing wrong with that. And in fact, you will very likely be very profitable if you stick to that perfectly. Okay. Now, your win rate might not be the best. Now, what if though, what if you had a situation where you said, hey, when there's news, here's what I do. When it's the New York Open, here's what I do. At this particular Todd, here's what I do.
Yeah.
Right. So now all
Sounds
of
like
a
you're
sudden,
saying that the trading plan is more of a system of playbooks rather
yeah,
than just one super ultra refined equation, right?
yeah,
Because there's no such thing as the same thing over and over. There's variables to consider, and it's just like if we were to go, driving down the road, you can't account for everything by only one strategy of driving. You don't just push gas and brake and steer. And that's all you do, right? There's
yeah,
other things to consider, and there's the weather that can change. Someone else who's driving that comes flying through, and you might need to adopt a different style of driving, right? You got to
yep.
catch up to them and follow them to their house, kind of thing. And I'm just kidding. But yeah, so you're saying that the delineation between trading plan and the flexibility is that the flexibility is just a part of your trading plan,
I'll give you
right?
a quick yeah, I'll give you a real example of what that could look like because driving is such a great example because analogy because you do have very linear rules of the road, right? There's a speed limit. Stop signs, you do a certain thing. Stop lights, you do a certain thing, right? Like there are rules that you have to obey by law, but which way you turn, it's up to you. It depends on where you're going. Shoot, even if
But
you have a
the way
point
to
A and
phrase it.
point B, there's different routes that you can take to get to point B, right? So in a way it's flexible, but there is a form of rigidity to it as well with the rules and the laws.
That makes a
And
lot of sense. Yeah.
yeah, so it's the same kind of thing in trading. So a real example of that would be like um a lot of people when they enter a trade and for anyone that has had any kind of one-on-one coaching with me, you know I hate this. I hate when I see in a trading plan, when I enter, I set a 10 pip stop loss. I hate that so much because in a lot of situations, maybe that's a great idea, but not in every situation. What I do is I focus on what does the chart tell me, right? And I found this mostly with James whenever I've done one-on-ones with James and I ask him a question, he'll be like, "Well, it depends." He always uses the word depends. Every single answer. Well, it depends. Depends on what the market's doing. It depends on what the chart is showing. So instead of a stop loss at 10 pips, why don't you look at your charts, see a couple of your wins, a couple of your losses, and look at maybe some kind of indication on the chart that would have told you, hey, this is the exit. And maybe it's 10 pips, maybe it's 8, maybe it's 15, whatever it is, but let the
Mhm.
chart dictate what that is, right?
It
You
sounds
should have a
going
stop
back to
loss.
the car scenario.
Yeah,
It sounds an awful lot like the different speed limits for the different roads, right?
exactly.
Like if I were to say every time I get in my car, I'm going to go 30 miles per hour. I think in Texas, the default, if there's no listed speed limit, like in an area, you assume that it's no more than 30, right?
Yeah.
And so that's like what I was thinking about. Well, I want to do a 10 pip stop loss on every trade that I take. It's like, well, that's like saying I'm going to drive 30 and assume everywhere I go. And
Yeah.
it's just kind of ridiculous. It's also ridiculous to say, well, I'm going to go 70 miles an hour because that's the highest one, right? That's the
Yeah.
biggest one. You've got to have the ability to adjust on depending on what road you're on, right? So I guess the word it or the phraseology of it depends is really important, and that comes from experience and mastery of understanding not just one thing but a series of different things. How does
Yeah.
this all relate to humility, though? I want to hear that again, right?
Well, well, I think it has to do with um, if you thinking that you know exactly what the chart is going to do,
Mm-hmm.
um, instead of having the openness or the humility to even after you enter a trade to know that, hey, you know what, the market's going to do what it does. My job is to respond accordingly. Um, and so that's the hard part because what happens here's the biggest challenge that people have. Um, let's say the market starts to go against their trade. They do a buy, it starts to go down. Okay. What they do is they are not humble. And so what they'll do is they'll be like, no. I was right though. I saw divergence. I saw this thing happen and this signal happen and everything. I was right. It's going the wrong way right now, but I was right. It's going to come back. And then it keeps going down. Ah, it's okay. It's going to come back. And then it keeps going down forever. And instead of taking a little 3, 5 pip loss, they're now 100 pips in the hole. And now it hurts to hit the close trade button because now you're like, gosh, I just lost 100 pips, you know? And so that's where humility comes into play, where you enter and you're like, well, the market doesn't want to go that way anymore. Close.
Do you think that this concept of being humble in that approach is always based on an element of the pride, or is there also times where you can be not humble because of maybe fear, for example, fear of missing out or fear of actually accepting the loss and stuff? Is that a point of not being humble in your opinion as well?
Yeah.
Or
Yeah. Fear is definitely a huge contributing factor. And it's like there's the fear of missing out aspect where, if we go back to the previous example, we think it's a buy market. I'm only taking buys. The thing tanks and they go, "Oh my gosh, I need to sell. I need to sell." No, you don't. You don't. From a probability standpoint, the chances of the market doing that was not very high. It did it, but that wasn't from a probability standpoint, that wasn't a move in your favor, right? And so there's that fear of missing out where they like, oh, I got to be a part of this trade. But then there's the other side of the fear of missing out, which is like it's almost like the fear of being wrong, and that's kind of where the pride aspect comes into it.
sure.
And I've felt that, and I know coaches in particular, or this happens whenever if sometimes if we highlight someone and we point out how great they're doing, all of a sudden they start getting that fear of, oh, now I got to maintain this.
How to perform. Yeah.
Yeah,
It's almost like they think that they're clocking into a W-2 job when they get behind a chart, right? I'm behind this chart right now, and now I need to make some pips, right?
yeah,
And that mentality can, whether it's fear or pride or whatever negative that's influencing the decision making, instead of being humble to the approach of this is a performance based scenario of how is the market performing, not you, right? Um, if you don't approach it with that humility to be willing to walk away, or be willing to be flexible, be willing to follow the plan where necessary, right? The speed limits and the roads, right? There's obviously nuance to this, but overall, if we aren't approaching this in the sense, or if we are approaching this in the sense of because I'm behind my chart right now, I need to do something, right? I feel like that's kind of the core dilemma is
yeah,
because I'm here right now, something has to happen. Otherwise, I'm not trading or I'm not a trader or something, like insert
yeah,
your negative outcome. And that's the humility part that we see that some of the greatest folks that we know that have been mentored by and who we've helped and such is that
yeah,
Bryan in particular has noticed this pattern that they have this um, uncanny character quality between the majority of the vast majority, if not all of them, is this weird sense of just a humble spirit with them. They're just genuinely humble people.
yeah,
And so if you're sitting there thinking, oh man, maybe I shouldn't trade or something because I'm not humble, like that's a good sign because you're leaning towards the humility. Okay,
yeah,
so
yeah, yeah.
or if someone's told you, like I think me and Bryan both were like, well, man, that almost excludes us then. And Bryan, Zach's awesome. Zach's the most humble person we know. And
Not
he
even
said,
close.
yeah. So, but yeah, that's where all this podcast came from, was the idea that there is this correlation between just the character quality of a successful trader seems to be that of humility, right?
Yeah,
So applying that to the systems, I think if we were to conclude is like if you approach it like you're clocking in for your job and something has to happen, there's a large amounts of humility that you're missing out on that can cause problems, whether it's fear based or pride based or inexperience based or whatever.
yeah, yeah.
Is that fair?
So yeah, it's beautiful. And again, kind of a mini framework to developing more humility. I know I could use some more. Pray and ask for more, serve other people, and then be prepared because part of it is you got to be
Prepared
humble.
because you'll get,
You're
yeah,
gonna get
we're
humbled.
all gonna get kicked in life, right? We'll be handed lemons, whatever way you
Yeah.
want to say it. Yeah.
So
We didn't
I,
talk too much about those things. Maybe we should do that next podcast, is dive deeper into why are those things important for being humble, right?
okay,
I'm
I
not
like
sure.
it.
We
That sounds good to me. Well, if you guys are on here listening and you're not members with us yet, um, it's not too late. In fact, it's the best time ever because we got holiday stuff going on, sales and whatnot. So hop onto our website, prosperitymovement.online. And in the bottom right corner, there's a little chat box, and you can type in there, just type in the word humility, and our bot will talk to you, and, and you can start to book a time with our team so that we can actually talk with you and see if this would be a good fit for you on your trading journey as well. So anyway, Travis, any last words?
um no, I don't think so. Wise
Awesome.
words all around. Thanks, Peter.
Thank you, Peter. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day. We'll talk to you guys next time.
Adios.